What's up, boys and girls? I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast brought to you by Lettermen Row and Buyers Automotive. That is Spencer Holbrook. We are back. We were both on a vacation a week ago of variant types. Oh, we're talking about variants. Please don't flag the video, YouTube. I'm talking about variant vacations. I was on the West Coast. Spencer was on the East Coast. And now we're back in the Middle Coast talking stuff about Ohio State recruiting. Football is in full swing, Spencer, and it feels really, really good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's starting to feel a little normal, maybe. We've got some official visit announcements that have been happening. It seems like things are starting to pick back up on the recruiting trail. And, they never really stop. But
they change.
Yeah, it was a little quiet for a long time. It was almost dead in a sense, Berm, and now it's coming back to life.
It was dead. It's still dead. For how much longer, we don't know. There is some conversation that the recruiting dead period could reach a conclusion on May 31st, and that's what we've talked about on this show before. But the belief is that maybe that final decision gets made this week. I've heard that the 15th is maybe the date for that. So I guess we'll pay attention to that on Thursday and see if that comes down the line as expected. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the show here. But I think the most important thing to understand about that dead period announcement, which is coming Thursday, is, in my opinion, Spencer, there's a small chance, a very small fraction of a chance, that if that announcement happens on Thursday, we could maybe see a delay in a big commitment that is scheduled for this Saturday. And I'll let you tell people who's committing this Saturday.
Borderline 5-star, will be a 5-star tackle. I'm not sure if he's there yet. Kiyaunta Goodwin from the Louisville area.
Louisville.
Yeah,
Louisville. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kiyaunta is committing Saturday, and very simple. The reason why, he told me straight up, he does not think that the dead period is going to end. And there are coaches that he's heard from that are pessimistic about it ending. There are others he's heard from that are optimistic about it ending. And so the messaging is sort of all jumbled up. As I've written about Kiyaunta Goodwin in the past, he is not going to commit somewhere he can't take visits to. And so the thought is, why not just commit and then see what happens? And that means he's not committing to Ohio State on Saturday because he's not visited Ohio State, had the chance to. Let me correct myself. He has visited Ohio State, but not as like the primary recruiting target on his visit. He's been there with Wan'Dale Robinson, Rondale Moore, et cetera. But he is going to commit elsewhere on Saturday. The likelihood, Spencer, is Kentucky.
I would assume, Berm, that the people telling him that the dead period is going to end, that's coming from Ohio State. And I think Kentucky is probably pounding into his brain, the recruiting dead period will not end. You need to commit.
I think it's just Ohio. I tend to agree with you that it's likely coming from the Wildcat side of things, that, hey, there's no guarantees here. This is a kid who's been very emotionally up and down in the last year about the dead period. He's thought it was going to end multiple times. He's been very frustrated at times. I would use the word pissed off. It seems like he's just been like, okay, is this ever going to happen? And I would agree with you. Kentucky has probably been like, hey, maybe it won't happen. You should just commit just in case. I don't think it's just Ohio State telling him that it's going to end. His final 5 schools of Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, Kentucky, and Michigan State, I would imagine the other 4 are very purposefully telling him, hey, this is coming to an end. Why are you doing this so soon? But I guess my point is, maybe there's a chance that he would delay and not announce on Saturday if there is a decision made. I'm not optimistic about that. I think that once you start to set these wheels in motion, it sort of becomes like the time, right?
I also don't think the recruitment ends when a decision is made, and I think we've made that clear. I think he's one of these guys that's going to make these visits regardless of where he's committed to, and that may ruffle some feathers around the country with wherever he chooses to commit to. But I think these visits are going to happen. I don't think Ohio State fans should panic when this decision is made, if it's made on Saturday. It's just one of those things where you set your place in a class, you understand they're the leader right now. And then once the visits happen, anything can happen. I think you're going to see that around the country, but especially in this particular case of a 5-star talented tackle who's got every school in the country wanting him.
Yeah. And I mean, again, things can change. The decision date could change before Saturday. Who knows? this could change as well. But Kiyaunta Goodwin has told me definitively he is definitely taking visits when he's allowed to take visits. So whether or not that happens in June, whether or not that happens in the season, who knows? I agree with you 100% that this recruitment is not anywhere close to over. It's probably actually just starting. And I think it's actually somewhat ironic in a way, Spencer, is that on Monday night, Tyler Booker, who is a potential borderline 5-star offensive lineman down at the IMG Academy in Florida, originally from Connecticut, he announced his final 5 schools. It's Ohio State, it's Alabama, it's Georgia, it's Oregon, and Florida. And, I actually feel like his plan of taking official visits in June, Ohio State's on that list. But I think that the Buckeyes still have a better shot with Kiyaunta Goodwin than they do Tyler Booker, even though Goodwin will be committed on Saturday to somewhere else. And so I think that's just the nature of football recruiting right now. There's a lot of nuance going on. Obviously, the thing with Tyler Booker is just get him on campus. The Buckeyes have not been able to do that. He's been to Florida. He's been to Georgia. He's been to Alabama. He's never been to Oregon. But, it's like this weird vibe right now that Ohio State really, who thought that they were in a really good position with Tyler Booker even a few months ago, right now just doesn't feel like they have a good read on where they are with him. It is important that he's still making the official visit, so there at least is a window open. But I think the window there is smaller than the one for Kiyaunta Goodwin. Well, I mean, it has to be. Kiyaunta Goodwin's a huge person. His window has to be bigger.
Yeah, and I think Ohio State was in on both of these recruitments relatively early. I think they've set themselves up to be in good spots for both of these guys. You got a guy who's a little more local than Connecticut/Florida. It's always weird to clarify where these guys are from when they go to the IMG Academy. I do think it's interesting, though, that, the Buckeyes felt like they were in a better position a couple months ago when there was no certainty about the dead period ending than they are now with Tyler Booker. And I know you have, a little bit more insight than I do on that, but it is kind of peculiar to me that they've slipped in that recruitment as things are starting to open up. It's a little weird.
I don't think the Buckeyes were ever necessarily like in the lead for Tyler Booker, and I want to be clear about that, but there does feel like a slight similarity in some way to the J.C. Latham recruitment from a year ago, where the Buckeyes felt like they were in a really good position and felt like they were building a really good relationship with the prospect and his family. And then all of a sudden something just happened and the recruitment becomes much more difficult for whatever reason. And I don't know necessarily that it has anything to do with the schools that are recruiting him, but maybe more the school where he's at. There seems to be a slight disconnect between the IMG Academy and Ohio State right now. And I don't really know what it is. With guys coming out of that school in the last few years, like Legend Cavazos, you'd think that the Buckeyes would have a good bond there. There's Jordan Fuller's brother is a coach there. Corey Dennis's brother is a coach there. Pepper Johnson is a coach there. But still, there seems to be this bizarre feeling. And not even Tyler Booker, this is apropos of nothing, but I look at a recruitment like Jihad Campbell, the defensive end / linebacker prospect in the class of 2022, who I think he was from New Jersey. When he left to go down to the IMG Academy at the end of 2020, Buckeyes felt like they were in great shape. And now there's a feeling like that is sort of just a lot of confusion about exactly where they stand. And I don't know. It's weird. I mean, you'd figure that one of the country's largest athletic programs and best football programs like Ohio State would have the opportunity to sort of build a good relationship with a talent producing powerhouse like IMG, but something just feels amiss. I don't know. I don't want to go too far down that road, but I think that there probably needs to be an honest conversation between those two sides somewhere to figure out if there's a problem.
Yeah, it just seems like there's just a little, like you said, miscommunication, maybe misunderstanding between the two sides. Just, the Buckeyes have gotten great players from IMG Academy, but lately they've been seemingly pushing for guys from there, and it just hasn't worked out. And you wonder, when they're going to break through there. And you wonder if there's some stuff going on behind the scenes, but you also wonder if it's just maybe the Buckeyes recruiting strategy there, and you don't know. You kind of have to take a look in the mirror and then look at the other side and say, hey, what exactly is going on here? And because Ohio State can't lose the connection to IMG Academy. And there's certainly, that's the thing. Like, you look at their coaching staff and there's 3 guys that have direct Ohio State ties. It should be a somewhat easy connection to make, but yet there seems to be something amiss. And
I don't know if it's one of those things, and we talk about it all the time, Spencer, the peer-to-peer recruiting is so much more important now than ever. Maybe that, maybe Ohio State rubbed a kid down there the wrong way, and he started to, believe that they were not handling things the right way, and that spread throughout the program. I don't know. It's certainly not. I don't think it's the coaching staff there, because again, there's 3 direct Buckeyes ties to the coaching staff, but there seems to be something that's happening there. And I think it's one of those moments where when visits can begin occurring again, and Ohio State can maybe get a coach back down there to actually talk to people in person, maybe things can get sorted out. But with respect to Tyler Booker, it seems like it's very important Ohio State gets him on campus to figure out whatever this disconnection is between their staff and the messaging in Bradenton, to clarify that. So I don't know. I don't know that I know things in this situation, but I feel things, and it's 2021, and I trust my feelings more than anything, Spencer.
Well, the other thing is, I think Tyler Booker is already scheduled for a visit. So
it's not officially scheduled. It was discussed that he was going to take a midweek visit in June, but it hadn't been locked in. But now that you see the final 5 schools, Ohio State in them, he is going to take all 5 official visits, he says. So now you can start to feel more confident, I guess, that it is locked in.
And that's a big deal, because when you have what we're right now calling something being a miss or a disconnect or something, sometimes it's hard to schedule those visits and just to get these guys on campus. If they can get Tyler Booker on campus, that can be the start of sorting out whatever's going on. And then you can move on from there and really begin to build back a relationship, or right whatever is wrong, or, whatever's going on, you can start to really repair that as you get a kid on campus. And maybe we're just looking too deep into this, but also, there could be something there.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just takes me back to J.C. Latham, and something just fell apart. And a lot of it seemed to happen when the dead period began and when he transferred to and was at IMG. And I don't know, there's a weird vibe going on. And my business is to just try to figure out what it is. But, until someone tells me that there's a concrete problem, then it's just nothing more than speculative and gut feel and all that stuff. And anyway, that's again, wrap that up with a tight little bow, package it up. I think that Kiyaunta Goodwin will commit to Kentucky on Saturday. I still think Ohio State has a better chance to land him right now than they do Tyler Booker, who released his top 5 on Monday. So that's where I'm sitting with those 2 things. Spencer, what else are we going to talk about? I mean, I think we have to talk about the dead period because, again, even though it's been talked about a little bit here, the interesting thing about the thought that the dead period could be coming to an end finally is that Ohio State seems intent on scheduling official visits and unofficial visitors, which they had not done in the previous few months. So that should at least give us a hint that they feel pretty good about the fact that it's going to be canceled or ended. But on top of that, I talked to 2 different players on Sunday at the Under Armour camp in Obetz, Ohio, from Ohio, to 2022 prospects who are good players, neither of them with an Ohio State offer, who both said that the Buckeyes had invited them to campus for a workout in June. And so I think what they're talking about, and Ryan Day alluded to this on Monday in his press conference, is that there's a belief that rather than the big camps that we've seen in the last handful of years, the 100, the 400, 500, 600 kid camps that they've had, Ryan Day said that there is a conversation about possibly being able to work them out on a one-on-one basis while they're on campus, and that they're going to have to limit the number of unofficial visitors at a time. So you're not going to be able to have the big camp settings that have, famously happened, at least not this summer. Maybe we get back to that next summer, but there at least does appear to be a silver lining that some of these kids around the state that have been waiting because they missed camps last year will get an opportunity to step up to the plate and take their swing.
Well, I think, Vern, part of this is, and I look at it from a little bit more of a higher up view and a little zoomed out, is like this is kind of a win-win for Ohio State, because if you get to have kids on campus and you start scheduling these things and it actually happens, you can start recruiting again, really recruiting, and not just sitting on Zoom with guys. If it doesn't happen and the dead period inexplicably does not end, because I think that would be just a horrible decision for the NCAA if it happened, then Ohio State can go to bat for the players it's trying to recruit and say, hey, we're still trying and fighting to get you guys on campus. We know that this is important for you guys. And it makes, a little bit of a PR, we're trying for you guys. And so I think that it's kind of a win-win for Ohio State. That's probably why these things are being scheduled. But also that does signal a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. I think this is there's finally some steam, and finally, Ohio State has been cautiously optimistic that the recruiting dead period would end previously, and they still didn't schedule visits. Now they're starting to schedule visits. I think that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at a camp like this Under Armour camp that just happened, it did provide somewhat of an opportunity for kids around the country who wanted to make a quick stop at Ohio State to get that first unofficial self-guided tour, but it's nothing like what's happened elsewhere around the country in the last few weeks. I mean, Florida State had almost 100 prospects at their spring game on Saturday, and the idea that they're doing that without coordinating it with the coaching staff is crazy to me. I don't think that's possible. But regardless of that, Ohio State was able to bring in players from around the country, like the two different offensive linemen, for example, Carson Hinsman from Wisconsin, Grayson Morgan from down in Tennessee, who they've been talking to both of those two for a while. They were each able to make some self-guided, at least drive around campus. It was raining all weekend in Columbus, so there wasn't a lot of time spent on the Oval hanging out or anything. But, it does at least whet the appetite for these kids to return, and those conversations are happening. So, I think that if you can get kids like Hinsman, like Grayson Morgan, like Ryan Baer up at Eastlake North High School near Cleveland, if you can get kids like Dillian Bradley, the safety down at Springfield, if you can get even committed players like Derek Shepard, who is a defensive tackle committed to Cincinnati out of Archbishop Alter High School in Dayton or Kettering, you at least have the opportunity to tell these kids, we are going to get to see you and evaluate you the correct way. And that's something that these kids have been waiting for a long time. And I guess my whole thing, Spencer, is I just hope the NCAA doesn't screw it up, which they seem to be good at.
Yeah, they're very good at it. But, aside from that, you've been talking about guys that you saw all weekend. So I kind of think the people, and myself included, would like to hear about it. So
yeah, I mean, I think that those are important conversations. I don't know that we need to talk about the Ohio State commitments, really. I mean, they're committed to Ohio State for a reason. They all showed up in really great shape. CJ Hicks continues to look like $1 million. He's just a different type of athlete, I think, than people are going to expect him to be. That we're not talking about. He's a pure linebacker. He's not one of these guys that I think is going to play the bullet position, but he is just fast, man. Like, as soon as he gets into Coach Marati's strength conditioning program, like he's going to end up at like 235, 240. And I think he could be a Darren Lee type impact player, just a big, fast, nasty outside linebacker. Gabe Powers looks great. The 30 pounds he's put on in the last year, he carries it really well. He didn't do much as far as drills went because he was dealing with a slight quad pull. So he was a little bit limited. Deshaun McCullough did not work out at all. He had a torn ligament in his foot that he had surgery on a few weeks ago. Jair Brown came to the camp and was around the Ohio State commits the whole time. I mean, I know there's still a lot of talk about Notre Dame with him, but he had just lost his father last week. And so I think he actually came to the camp for one of the primary reasons was because he wanted to be around the guys like CJ Hicks and the guys that he's gotten to know really well through this process. And fortunately, I'm really glad to see this happen. He was able to get out of the camp after it was over without anybody really talking to him about recruiting. And, for the Notre Dame media that was there, for the Ohio State media that was there, that was curious about Notre Dame, I think I'd like to give 2 thumbs up to those people who let him just sort of leave and not have to deal with recruiting on Sunday. Congratulations for making the right decision. Tegra Tishabola, I mean, I talked about him a little bit on the site on Monday morning in the breakdown of the camp. He's still checked in at 340 pounds. He's still heavier than he is going to need to be when he arrives at Ohio State. I think they'd like to see him in that 315, 320 range. But the difference between Tegra Tishabola that I saw on Sunday and what we saw last summer at the same location, Spencer, he looked a lot more athletic, a lot more aggressive. And even though he was still carrying 340 pounds, it looked to be a much better 340 pounds. And I think that some of the questions I had about his role in the offensive line got answered because I think I saw him move a whole lot better on Sunday than I did last year.
That's got to make you feel better because, he's one of those guys that started in the rankings very high. Fans love to pay attention to rankings. He started out very high, commits to Ohio State before his recruitment really takes off. So his recruitment never truly takes off. He's an in-state guy. A lot of programs just say, well, he's committed to Ohio State. He's from Ohio. No reason to offer him, no reason to contact him. And so, he starts to slip in those rankings because you just don't get a lot of attention when you're an in-state guy committed to Ohio State. Programs don't really pay much attention to you after you commit. And so I think there's a little bit of doubt among some people about what he can be. I still think if he gets down to that 315, 320 range, he can be an anchor player on the Ohio State offensive line. I think he can be a really solid player. But it just, he doesn't get the same attention that some of these other guys do or some of the flasher positions do. But I think it's important to remember he's still developing and he's pretty raw right now. And I think he's going to continue to get better. But it seems like the Ohio State commits had a pretty good day.
They did. And I'm going to finish that conversation on Tegra. A lot of that, what you're saying is 100% right. He committed extremely early. Nobody else is really talking to him. He's not picking up big offers from around the country. But there's also a possibility that can happen where kids in that position get somewhat complacent. And I think that last summer, the months after the pandemic began and the dead period began, I think maybe Tegra did a little bit. And it seems like he has adjusted that. And like I said, he looked, even though he was still at 340 pounds, I think he was like closer to 360 last summer when we saw him. He looked a whole lot better, moving very well. Just looked a lot more explosive. And I think that you can finally see, I still think he's a guard at the next level, which underscores the Ohio State need for tackles in this class, which is why they're looking, still at people like Ryan Baer and looking at players like Grayson Morgan down in Tennessee. They're looking for those guys that can be true tackles, while still recruiting the Addison Nichols, the Ernest Greens, the Tyler Bookers, et cetera. But it definitely, you look at a kid in a class of players right now at Ohio State that's committed that have really worked hard in this last year. And I think that's, not always the case. There's kids who get, caught up in the accolades and, I'm an Ohio State commitment. You're in the middle of a dead period that won't end. You're in the middle of a pandemic. Maybe you can sit around on your butt and get fat and lazy and not do anything. The kids committed to Ohio State have not had that happen. I think that that's important. And if we move to the class of 2023, which I think was the real focus for me heading into Sunday's camp, since Emil Wagner did not make it, and he was someone I was really looking forward to seeing. It was how Ohio State targets in that class look, because those kids are also in the middle of the pandemic and the dead period. And how did they spend their time? Kaden Proctor, the number 2 ranked offensive tackle out of Iowa, he looked great. There's a kid, Samson Okunlola, from Massachusetts, who is a top 100 player. And I wrote about him on Tuesday morning as a player that I think Ohio State should offer coming out of this camp. But there's this mindset that he and his brother, Samuel, who's a 2022 defensive end, 3-star prospect, are a package deal. And so Ohio State maybe isn't going to offer Samson because they aren't going to offer Samuel and they don't think it's worthwhile. And that makes me wonder, Spencer, if you're Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, et cetera, don't you just offer anyway and say, like, maybe a place like that has the cachet, the je ne sais quoi to say, hey, if you get an opportunity from us, it's more important than this package deal with your brother.
Yeah, because I think so, because Ohio State has the gravitas, which is the word I thought you were going to use, to lure a player away from a package deal. You look at supposed package deals in the past, they rarely ever work out. Now, when you're talking about brothers, it's a little different. But there is the idea that Ohio State is a strong enough pool to where if a kid is just, I'll just put it bluntly, if a kid is better than his brother and can play at Ohio State, and passes up the opportunity to play at Ohio State, to play at a place that's going to take a 3-star commitment, a Boston College, even a Michigan, then more power to them. Almost
Michigan loves recruiting Massachusetts, and they've offered Okunlola, but Ohio State, the real holdup at this point, and because this kid was he walked into the camp and he was the guy that everyone was like, oh, who the heck is that? He performed the same way. It wasn't just a look like Tarzan, play like Jane type of situation. He was a very, very aggressive, physical offensive lineman. Ohio State, in my opinion, should definitely offer him. I thought he was the best 2023 prospect that I saw. And then Kaden Proctor was right with him. But it's just interesting to me because I mean, I know Ohio State's approach on these package deal things is that they are not involved in them, but they must truly believe that this kid is 100% a package deal, or they would offer him based on his own merit because he was really good and only getting better. Spencer, are there any players that you wanted me to deal with or to talk about?
No, I'm a little, bummed that I wasn't able to be there because it's right in our backyard and all that. I was traveling back, so I wasn't able to make the trip. But no, I think you covered it all. We got a lot of information on the site about the camp and who impressed and who, was maybe a little less than what you expected to see. I think you did a really nice job covering the camp. And if people haven't read the stuff yet, then I really encourage it because nobody had an eye on the camp like you did. So.
Well, there's two other guys I think we should talk about because I think they're 2 5-stars in the class of 2023 in Ohio. And so I want to at least touch on them because I think it's important when you're doing like the breakdown here of the camp, and one little snippet is not enough to really underscore what I think my thoughts were. First of all, Sonny Styles is what I said on our show 2 weeks ago. I thought he was the best player in Ohio, regardless of class. And after seeing him live and seeing the way he moves, seeing the size, seeing the way he runs like a cornerback but looks like a linebacker, this kid is if he keeps his head on straight, and by all accounts, he's not the type of kid who is not going to. We're talking Jack Sawyer, Zach Harrison, Paris Johnson type. Like, you have to get this kid. Like, you have to. Aside from the fact that his dad is an Ohio State legacy, yes, the Notre Dame thing is a real possibility and a real concern as his brother is there, and Marcus Freeman has done a great job recruiting him early. But Ohio State has to get Sonny Styles. Like, this kid is, he's really, really good. And I think one of the good news bits for Ohio State here is that by the time Sonny Styles would sign a letter of intent anywhere, there's almost no chance that Marcus Freeman will be at Notre Dame. And so you can at least sort of look at that down the road and say, hey, it's a real possibility that he ends up there, but there's going to be major hurdles for Notre Dame to clear by the time that he would sign. Because A, his brother could be gone, and B, Marcus Freeman is likely to be gone. And so some of those things are going to change. Ohio State. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. There were also a couple of different circumstances with his brother's recruitment that were just a little different and odd for most recruitment. So I don't think that this is my brother went there, I need to go there type of deal. I think this is it's not a package deal for sure. I think that Ohio State understands that. And I think Ohio State is beginning to, they probably understood it all along, but I think Ohio State truly is beginning to understand how important it is to land a prospect the magnitude of Sonny Styles.
Yeah, and Lorenzo Jr., as you mentioned, he was number one, a wide receiver in the class of 2020. That in itself, in a class that had Julian Fleming, Jackson Smith, and Jigba G. Scott, and Mookie Cooper, was a challenge for Ohio State to overcome because they already had 4 receivers and they weren't sure exactly if they believed Lorenzo is a wide receiver. They were recruiting him as a defensive back. He wants to play wide receiver, so you sort of get walked out of the recruitment there. But you definitely don't let Sonny Styles get away. And the Buckeyes have made sure from last August when he played his first game as a sophomore at Pickerington Central High School, it was on ESPN. Ohio State called him and offered him like immediately after the game was over, like maybe before he got off the field that day. So they've been very clear with him, with his family, about exactly where they see him on the priority list. And getting him early would be a Jack Sawyer-esque type win for the Buckeyes. He's definitely going to visit in June, probably a couple times if he can, to start really ramping up that relationship towards September when the Buckeyes can talk to him more freely. The other player that I want to talk about is Brennan Vernon, because I think that this is one that you're going to see in the next couple weeks as rankings come back out and get adjusted. You might see Brennan's ranking drop a little bit, but I think that is probably fair, but also not really relevant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you explain it a little more, I think it'll make sense.
Like, Brennan Vernon can be a Jack Sawyer type player, But right now, he is not a Jack Sawyer type player. Like he can be if you have a brain out there that can rewind time, do this thing like the Eye of Oragato on Doctor Strange, and let's just, turn it back. He has the ability to be a Jack Sawyer type prospect, but he's not yet a Jack Sawyer type player. Does that make more sense?
So he's more raw
he's got no real idea yet what he's doing on the football field. And this is not a problem with Brennan Vernon. This is a problem with the NCAA dead period for the last year and a half. Jack Sawyer had 3+ years of going to camp with Larry Johnson to learn how to play defensive end. Brennan Vernon had a shoulder injury that he had to have surgically repaired after his freshman year. He broke his foot in the middle of his sophomore year. And so he has not been able to play a lot of football. But if you look at the kid at 6'5", 242 pounds, really long, he hasn't really started to develop his body yet the way that he's going to. You're going to be talking about if he dials in and dives into this over the next 2 years, by the time he's a high school senior, you could be looking at a 6'5", 275-pound defensive end who can move. And boy, oh boy, Brennan Vernon has an attitude that people are going to love on a football field. He is a angry football player. And I hope that people don't see a rankings drop if it does happen and think that it's a sign that he's not the type of player or prospect that he's been expected to be, because he is going to be that guy, but he needs to be taught and needs to play some more football. And the sky is the absolute limit for him.
Is it more of like a raw Bosa situation? When you describe the 6'4", 275, can move really well, super angry, you kind of do start to get a glimpse of what he could be. And that kind of reminds you of what he could be. But at the same time, he's just so raw that you can't make that comp yet, like you could with Jack Sawyer, like you could with even like a Zach Harrison trying to comp them. It's kind of hard, I think, to make a comp with Brennan Vernon because he's just so raw.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. And I think he's much more. So we've talked in the past about Caden Curry, the 2022 defensive lineman from Indiana, as sort of the Nick Bosa type player. And Brennan is more Joey in my mind, like that sort of prospect. He actually, I mean, if he just walks, like if you watch Brennan Vernon walk by, if he had blonde hair, you would not know it wasn't Joey Bosa, like at 15 years old. It's just the gait, it looks the same. It's just it's pretty fascinating, actually. And like I said, for a kid like that in his build, with his mindset, if he gets coached up the right way, he's going to be really, really special. And I think it's one of these situations where you just have to be patient and let a kid develop on his own timeline. That's something Ryan Day talked about a lot on Monday afternoon in his press conference. He was talking about it from an Ohio State perspective, that everyone has their own timeline, their own path. But in recruiting, we are sort of guilty, I think, of just assuming that because someone is 6'5", 240 pounds as a freshman, that they're going to be developing on the same timeline that other guys did. And that's just not the case. And especially when you throw in injuries, especially when you throw in coaching changes. Menor lost one of, legendary coach and Coach Triv in the last year plus. And so they've got a new coach, a new program kind of starting up there. Be patient with Brennan Vernon, because it's definitely going to be worth it whenever he ends up in college. And I still expect that will be Ohio State. There was some conversation about him trying to get to the spring game and visiting for the weekend, but I don't think that's going to happen. And it shouldn't. No, I mean, I know a lot of kids want to visit this weekend for the spring game, Spencer, but what's the point?
There isn't.
What's the point?
There isn't one.
And there isn't one. And so if you're a recruit watching this or a recruit's parent watching or listening to this, my advice is don't waste your time. You're not going to be able to talk to the coaches while you're there. If you want to see the campus and be inside the Ohio Stadium, cool. But if you're looking to get anything out of it from a recruiting perspective, it's probably not the right time to do that. The Buckeyes have been patient and waiting for the end of the dead period, which we think now will be almost certainly May 31st. Come June 1, these kids are going to have tons of opportunities to get back on campuses. And Brennan Vernon will be someone that Ohio State wants to see immediately and get to work with him immediately. And so I'm sure Larry Johnson and the Buckeyes are excited for that opportunity. And they should be, because he is going to be a superstar at the next level whenever he learns how to play football. Same thing with Zach Harrison. I mean, I'm not trying to be, curt here. I used to say the same thing about Zach Harrison. He really didn't know how to play football in high school. And now we're starting to see the fruition be fulfilled, because he is turning into the player that he was as a prospect. So, am I good? Makes sense?
Yeah, that makes more sense now that you've explained it. I appreciate you explaining it.
I just don't want people to badmouth a kid or think that he's falling down the rankings because he's not good, because that's just not the case. It's just everyone is at a different spot in their development. And when you've only played 6 games of high school football or 8 games of high school football, that the projections are based on very, very limited, visual. And I think the best thing for Brennan Vernon is to do what he did on Sunday. Go out and compete, make sure that he shows up. He's not a kid who wants to be at these type of events, but at this juncture, you need all the experience in football you can get. And it's a very valuable barometer to see where you are against players like Kaden Proctor, against players like Samson Okunlolo, to see, okay, am I here? What do I have to do? And at this juncture, any sort of coaching up, any sort of training that you can get, you should be taking. And so I think that it's actually probably a really good thing for Brennan Vernon to have some of those expectations lowered a touch, so that he can just be focused on what he needs to be focused on, which is, how do I become a better football player from here? Because as I said, the sky is the limit for him. And the 5-star potential is absolutely there. Is he a 5-star player right now? We don't know. I mean, we just don't know. So I know who is a 5-star player: Spencer Holbrook. 5-star, 5-tool guy. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast, brought to you by Lettermen Row and Buyers Auto. Please rate, review, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, let yourself know when we got new stuff out there. And thanks for watching, everyone. See ya.